Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. I stood there in disbelief, jaw clenched, eyes narrowing at the gleaming silver fence that now sliced 6 feet into my property like a middle finger made of steel. What are you gonna do about it? Garrett smirked, arms crossed over his overpriced athleisure wear. The morning sun bounced off his designer sunglasses like they belonged on a movie villain, not a neighbor. He looked proud, triumphant, like he'd just won a game I didn't even know we were playing. My name's Wayne, I'm 47, and for the past 22 years, I've worked as an environmental consultant. I know every single wetland setback regulation in the state of Oregon. I've testified in court, I've shut down billion-dollar developments, and I've watched grown men cry when I handed them their compliance reports. But in all those years, nothing prepared me for the petty war my neighbor was about to start. You see, Garrett didn't just build a fence. He built a monument to entitlement. A line in the dirt that declared, "I'm rich and you're in my way." He had moved in 2 years ago after buying the old McCullough property, once a modest farmstead with oak trees, blackberry thickets, and a view of the creek that had made me fall in love with my own house 15 years ago. Garrett tore it all down, bulldozed the barn, cut down the oaks, then built a $7 million monument to his tech-fueled ego. The house looked like a Silicon Valley fortress landed in Beaverton. "Don't worry," he'd said at the HOA meeting. "I'm just here to raise a family and build a legacy." Apparently, that legacy started with stealing 6 feet of my land. I tried to keep my voice even. "That's my property, Garrett. I've got original survey maps." He waved a hand like I was some old crank. "Property lines are vague out here. Besides, what are you doing with it? It's just overgrown weeds and mud. I'm improving the neighborhood." The weeds he was talking about? A state-classified wetland buffer zone. Protected land. Critical salmon habitat. And he had no idea what he'd just walked into. "Handle it properly," I repeated aloud to myself as I walked back toward my porch. Garrett laughed behind me. "Whatever that means, man." But he'd already lost. Because Garrett didn't just steal 6 feet of land. He trespassed into something far more dangerous. My expertise. It had started gradually. First, the landscaping crews tossing their clippings over the boundary. Then the sprinklers aimed a little too far toward my shrubs. Contractors parked on my grass during his endless construction projects. Every time I politely asked. Every time he smiled and said he'd fix it. He never did. But the fence? That was deliberate. Installed while I was out visiting my daughter in Seattle. Perfectly measured. Professionally installed. My old wooden survey stakes had been pulled out, tossed aside like garbage. That night, I walked the boundary line with my original survey from 15 years ago. I'd kept every document, every permit. My father taught me to keep records the way other people keep memories. As I measured, a cold realization sank in. The fence didn't just steal 6 feet of my land. It crossed the wetland boundary. Which meant it wasn't just a civil dispute anymore, it was a potential environmental violation. And if Garrett's fence was in violation, what about the house? I spent that night reviewing documents like a detective cracking a cold case. The original permits, the wetland impact reports, the site maps, all of it pointed to one glaring fact. Garrett had built closer to the creek than he was allowed. Maybe he thought no one would notice. Maybe he didn't care. But he'd built inside a protected zone, and now he'd fenced across it like a man daring nature to fight back. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't rage. I didn't shout. I just planned. Because if there's one thing I've learned in my career, it's this. You don't get angry. You get evidence. The next morning, I knocked on Garrett's front door. He answered in a smug pair of gym shorts and a smugger's smile. "Didn't expect a visit so soon." "I want you to remove the fence," I said flatly. He chuckled like I'd told him I wanted to buy his Tesla. "Not happening. I had a professional survey done. My guy said it's legal." "Your guy's survey doesn't overrule the state. Your problem," he snapped, "is that you think this land still belongs to people like you. Newsflash, times have changed. I'm building something here. You're just clinging to weeds and nostalgia." He crossed his arms. "And if you keep pushing this, I'll make your life hell. I've got lawyers, money, connections. You want to fight? Bring it on." He slammed the door. And that's when I realized something even more disturbing than his arrogance. He believed he was untouchable. That afternoon, a letter from his attorney arrived, accusing me of harassment. That evening, neighbors started calling, suddenly curious about the troublemaker trying to start something over a fence. And by nightfall, the police called, saying Garrett had expressed concern for his family's safety. He was isolating me, turning the narrative, painting me as the unreasonable one. It was brilliant, it was infuriating, and it was a mistake, because he pushed me past the point of neighborly patience, and into the realm of professional annihilation. That night, I logged into the state environmental compliance portal using my credentials. I pulled up every permit related to Garrett's mansion. The final approval for construction had one glaring condition. A post-construction compliance review was required within 6 months of completion. The house had been done for over a year. The review had never happened. The setback violations weren't hypothetical. They were documented. And I knew exactly what to do. I picked up the phone. Tony Reeves, Department of Environmental Quality, came the voice on the other end. Tony. It's Wayne. Wayne? Haven't heard from you in a while. What's up? I took a breath. I've got something. A serious wetland violation. Possibly criminal. Might want to bring enforcement. Tony was quiet for a beat. Talk to me. I smiled. And for the first time in 48 hours, I felt something different from rage. I felt certainty. Because Garrett had spent millions building his dream house. On land that never belonged to him. And now it was time to burn it all down, with paperwork. When the police called that night, I thought it was a mistake. Mr. Wayne? The officer asked. We received a call from a Garrett Langston. He says you've been threatening him and his family. We're just doing our due diligence. Wanted to give you a heads up before anything escalates. I stared at my kitchen wall, stunned. Threatening? I asked him to move a fence. The officer didn't say much after that. Told me to stay civil. Told me they'd log the call. I thanked him and hung up. And then I sat there in the dark for over an hour, the silence ringing in my ears louder than any storm. This is how it starts, I thought. They flipped the script. They don't need to be right. They just need to be louder. The next morning my phone buzzed nonstop. Not from the police, not from Garrett, but from the neighborhood group chat. The one I barely participated in. The one Garrett had taken over like a campaign manager. A neighbor named Carol posted, I don't want to get involved, but it's sad seeing Wayne harass a young family over a property line. He's been here longer. Shouldn't he be more welcoming? Another neighbor added, Garrett's wife cried when she talked to me. Said her twins can't even play outside without being watched by Wayne like a hawk. Is this really who we are as a community? And then, honestly, if Wayne wanted peace, he'd just accept the change and stop dragging us into his issues. They made me sound like some bitter, reclusive man. The weird neighbor. The threat. I could practically hear Garrett whispering in their ears, wearing that plastic smile, pretending to be the victim. That evening, Dorothy, an elderly widow 2 houses down, rang my doorbell. She brought cookies. Wayne, sweetie, she said. Garrett told me what happened. Maybe you two could just talk it out? His boys are so sweet. They shouldn't have to deal with grown-up fighting. I told her calmly that he'd taken 6 feet of protected land, wetland, not weeds. That he removed my survey markers, violated setback ordinances, and possibly broke environmental law. She blinked at me like I was speaking Martian. Oh, well, maybe you should forgive and forget. No one wants legal trouble, dear. That's when I knew. Garrett had done more than steal my land. He'd stolen my reputation. Even my daughter, Jessica, called the next night. She's 26, lives in Seattle, and she's always been the rational one. My anchor. Dad, she said carefully, what's going on? I saw Garrett's post online. He said you've been threatening to sue over mud. Is it true? Mud. I snapped. He built a fence 6 feet into protected habitat. That's not mud, Jess. It's regulated buffer zone. There was a pause. Okay, but do you really need to fight this? Couldn't you just let it go? That hurt more than I thought it would. Even she didn't understand. I hung up and stared out my window at Garrett's mansion. I watched the lights flick on one by one, soft, warm, innocent. Like nothing was wrong. Like he hadn't declared war. I started to second-guess myself. Maybe I was taking this too far. Maybe I was being the cranky man with too much time on his hands. Maybe I was the one making a mountain out of a 6-foot-wide molehill. That's how gaslighting works. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's slow, silent, subtle. A sideways glance from a neighbor. A cold shoulder at the mailbox. A comment that lingers just long enough to make you question your memory. But every time I looked at the fence, I remembered what I'd seen in the environmental reports. Garrett had lied. He didn't just miscalculate. He knew the buffer zone existed. He chose to ignore it. And the law wasn't written to protect egos. It was written to protect ecosystems. I wasn't crazy. I was the only one seeing clearly, so I dug deeper. I opened my laptop and accessed the environmental compliance portal again. I reviewed Garrett's original building permits. And that's when I saw the most important detail. A conditional clause in the final approval. Post-construction environmental review to be conducted within 6 months of completion. Failure to complete this review will result in automatic permit suspension pending investigation. The house had been finished for over a year. No review. No inspection. No approval. He built a $7 million mansion. Illegally. And no one noticed. No one except me. I called Tony again, my friend in the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. I kept it casual. Hypothetically, I said, what happens if a post-construction review is skipped? He whistled. Bad. Real bad. Depending on the location, it could mean fines, restoration orders, even demolition. Even a house? Especially a house. If it's inside a protected buffer and wasn't permitted properly, the law doesn't care what it cost. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then, what if I had evidence? Permits, surveys, satellite images. Then you'd better send it to the right person. You want Walsh in enforcement. He doesn't play. That night, I sat at my kitchen table until 2 a.m. compiling everything. I printed the surveys, marked the GPS coordinates, labeled the photographs with time-stamped metadata, highlighted the setback violations on satellite maps. I even included screenshots of Garrett's social media posts mocking me, just to show intent. By the time I was done, I had a report thicker than a college thesis. And all I had to do was send it. But I didn't. Not yet. Because a part of me still hesitated. What if I ruined a family? What if those twins had to leave their school? What if Vanessa, Garrett's wife, had no idea? Would I be the villain? Would I regret it? Then, like clockwork, Garrett knocked on my door the next morning. Wearing his smile like a mask and holding a bottle of wine like it was a peace treaty. Wayne, he said, let's make a deal. He offered to pay for the 6 feet. Told me it was just land. Told me, everything's about money. When I refused, his tone changed. Don't be stupid, he snapped. Name your price. 10,000? 20? I looked him dead in the eyes. There's no amount. He laughed. Come on. You're bluffing. No one gives up money. I closed the door in his face. And this time I didn't hesitate. I opened my laptop, attached the report, and clicked send. To Walsh. To enforcement. To the storm that Garrett didn't see coming. I sent the report at 9:02 a.m. sharp. At 9:04 I received a reply. Mr. Wayne, thank you for your detailed documentation. A compliance officer and director from our enforcement division will be on site within 48 hours for a preliminary inspection. Please be available to confirm boundary data. It was signed by Director Alan Walsh, head of the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality Enforcement Division. That's when it stopped being personal and became official. Garrett had no idea. While he was outside sipping lattes on his stone patio, pointing out improvements to his buddies, I was setting a clock he couldn't see. I watched from behind my blinds as he gave a tour of the new fire pit area, smiling like a man who owned the world. He thought the story was over. But the real story was just beginning. Because what I found after sending the report made my blood run cold. That afternoon, out of pure curiosity, or maybe obsession, I kept digging. I opened the GIS, Geographic Information Systems, database and overlaid the satellite imagery from 2 years ago with the one from last month. The difference was staggering. The approved site plan showed the mansion 33 feet from the creek's high water mark. But the structure Garrett actually built? 13 feet. 20 feet too close. I opened the wetland delineation report. It had GPS data, lat/lawn coordinates for where the 30-foot buffer zone began. I plugged those into my mapping tool. And there it was in horrifying clarity. The house itself was built deep inside the protected buffer zone. Worse still, the outdoor kitchen, the pool, the landscaping, all of it sat in violation. The fence was just the tip of the spear. The house was the body of the crime. And Garrett had no idea that his million-dollar dream estate was a ticking environmental time bomb. I called Tony again. Tony, I said, voice tight. I found something else. Tell me. I walked him through it all. The imagery overlays. The GPS data. The violations baked into the house's footprint. He whistled again. Damn. That's not just a fine. That's structural non-compliance. What does that mean? It means they'll make him tear it down. I stared out at Garrett's mansion through my office window. You're saying they'll demolish the house? If enforcement confirms this? Yes. And they won't care what it cost. DQ has done it before. Not often, but they have. Especially if they think it was willful. I remembered the HOA meeting where Garrett bragged about how no one double-checks these things. He knew. And now he'd pay. The inspectors arrived 2 days later. A white government pickup with a DQ emblem rolled up at 9 a.m. sharp. Out stepped 2 people, a woman in her 30s with surveying gear and a middle-aged man in a black windbreaker holding a clipboard. Director Alan Walsh. Garrett met them in khakis and a golf shirt, shaking hands, all smiles. He probably thought it was a routine check. Maybe even a courtesy call. I watched from my kitchen, heart hammering. Then something happened. As Walsh pulled out the paperwork and began pointing toward the creek, Garrett's smile cracked. His body stiffened. He turned slowly toward the fence, then toward the house. That was the moment he realized this wasn't routine. This was enforcement. The inspection lasted 4 hours. They measured, took photos, walked the buffer zone, documented everything. Eventually they came to my door. "Mr. Wayne," Walsh said, "we need to verify your property lines and buffer markers." I took them to the original survey posts, the ones Garrett had ripped out and discarded like trash. I'd replaced them with flagged markers and GPS points for this very reason. Sarah, the younger inspector, took notes, nodding as she scanned the site. "This fence is definitely in violation," she confirmed. "But it's more than that. The house itself appears to be within the critical setback zone." Walsh's voice was cold. "This could result in forced remediation." My mouth went dry. Meaning? Meaning, depending on the scope of violation, the owner could be required to remove any non-compliant structures, including the house. It was one thing to imagine it, another to hear it. That afternoon, a certified envelope was delivered to Garrett's front porch. I watched from my window as he opened it and sat down on his steps like a man who'd been shot. He stayed there for nearly an hour. No posturing. No phone calls. Just stillness. Later that evening he came to my door again. No whine, no smug grin. Just fear. "Wayne," he said, voice hollow. "I need to ask you something." I stepped outside. "What? Did you call the state?" "I reported an illegal fence in a protected wetland buffer. They're saying I have to tear down the house." I didn't respond. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a day. $7 million, Wayne. It's everything I have. My kids, my wife. That land was never yours. He stared at me. "You could have just let it go. And you could have followed the law." His hands shook. "I'll fix it. I'll pay whatever fine they want." I shook my head slowly. "Garrett, it's too late." The final report came 6 weeks later. Full demolition ordered. The findings were damning. Setback violations exceeding 20 feet. No post-construction review completed. Protected habitat irreparably damaged. Evidence of willful negligence. Garrett's appeals were denied. The courts sided with the state. No amount of money could undo the violation. The house, the entire $7 million monument to ego, was ordered to be removed, piece by piece. Restoration required within 90 days. And I was just a witness now. A bystander to the justice I had set in motion. I should have felt triumphant. I should have popped a bottle of something cold and leaned back as Garrett's empire crumbled. But I didn't. What I felt was surgical. Precise. Cold. Like a man watching a fire, he started not to warm his hands, but to cleanse a disease. Because the moment Garrett showed up on my porch, pleading, bargaining, begging, I realized something. He never saw me as a threat. Not really. He saw me as a nuisance. A hiccup in his plans. The last stubborn tree in the way of a new road. Even now he didn't understand. This wasn't personal vengeance anymore. This was justice. And I would make sure every inch of it was permanent. After the demolition order, Garrett launched a full-scale legal blitz. He hired a firm from Portland with a reputation for scorched earth tactics. They tried to delay, dismiss, spin the violation as a clerical error. They claimed the buffer lines were vague, that the county had tacitly approved the location, that the missing post-construction review was the county's fault. But I'd anticipated that. Because during those long nights of research, I hadn't just compiled permits. I'd filed FOIA requests. Pulled emails between his contractor and the county. Screenshotted every zoning meeting minute where Garrett had claimed his contractor was handling compliance. I even found a digital blueprint, time-stamped, where the original approved layout had been altered to show the house 20 feet closer to the creek. Forgery? Maybe. Negligence? Absolutely. Either way, it was enough to shut every appeal down. Garrett's home was now scheduled for deconstruction. Not just demolition, but restoration. The DQ had ordered full removal of the house, patio, and outdoor kitchen, complete replanting of native wetland flora, soil rehabilitation for damaged zones, and monitoring for 5 years to ensure compliance. The cost? Nearly $8 million. Garrett was hemorrhaging money by the day. But I wasn't finished. I sent a formal report to the Homeowners Association. It included the environmental violations, the pending demolition, and the damage to the protected creek, the legal liability the neighborhood faced if they didn't formally separate themselves from Garrett's project. The board voted unanimously to expel Garrett from the HOA. He lost access to community privileges. His family was excluded from events. Parents stopped inviting his twins to birthday parties. Even the woman who once posted, "He brought cookies when my husband was sick," blocked him on Facebook. He had become radioactive. And it wasn't because of me. It was because truth has gravity. And once it starts falling, it crushes everything built on lies. But there was one more step. One final blow to ensure Garrett could never crawl back. I filed an anonymous tip to the Oregon State Tax Assessor's office. You see, Garrett had claimed on public records that the property was environmentally compliant to get a reduced tax rate on the parts of the land near the creek. It was fraud. And tax fraud? That gets real attention. 2 weeks later, another state vehicle pulled into Garrett's gravel driveway. The next day, a notice of audit was posted on his door. I watched from my porch, sipping black coffee. Sometimes revenge doesn't need fire. Sometimes it just needs paperwork. Jessica called that night. "Dad," she said softly, "I saw the news." Garrett's name had made headlines in the Oregon Tribune. Tech mogul's mansion ordered demolished over environmental violations. It went viral within 24 hours. I said nothing. "Was it you?" she asked. I let the silence hang. She sighed. "I get it now." "Get what?" "Why you never let the land go. Why you fought. It wasn't about the fence." "No," I said. "It was about the lie." "Did it feel good?" I thought about that. No. But it felt right. The next morning, Garrett tried one last move. He stood at the edge of our property line, what used to be the fence, holding a clipboard. His voice was hoarse. "Drat. I want to propose something." I didn't move. "We're listing the house for salvage. The materials. It's going to auction. Maybe we can, I don't know, make it less painful." I raised an eyebrow. Less painful for who? He stared at the clipboard like it could shield him from shame. "You were right," he said, voice cracking. "About all of it. I built without thinking. Without caring. I thought I could fix it with money. I stayed quiet. I thought being rich made me safe. Still I said nothing." His hand trembled. "I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. But it was something. And I finally understood why people say revenge isn't sweet. It's heavy. But it's necessary." The sound of diesel engines cut through the quiet like war drums. I was already on my porch with a thermos of coffee when the state-hired demolition crew rolled into Garrett's driveway at 6:47 a.m. sharp. 3 excavators. 2 dump trucks. An unmarked van filled with environmental officers. And 1 white SUV with DQ plates, parked front and center like a judge entering the courtroom. The execution of Garrett's monument had officially begun. And it started with the fence. 20 minutes. That's all it took to erase the smug silver barrier that had started this war. I watched as the steel posts that once cut through my land like a knife were yanked out of the earth like weeds. Snapped. Bet. Tossed into a flatbed like garbage. A man in an orange vest sprayed bright blue chalk over the raw earth beneath where the fence had stood. Protected buffer zone. Do not disturb. It was surreal. A line once claimed through arrogance was now reclaimed by the state. By law. By truth. Garrett didn't come outside. I imagined him sitting somewhere in the dark, blinds closed, face in his hands, realizing that no lawyer, no dollar, no last-minute appeal would stop what was coming. Because this wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was consequence. The house went next. Not all at once. There was no satisfying movie-style explosion. It was methodical, controlled, clinical. Crews began deconstructing the outer layers first. Stone facades, glass balcony railings, roof tiles. Every piece was labeled, cataloged, loaded into salvage trucks. Because DQ didn't just want it gone. They wanted it undone. The patio came up in slabs. The outdoor kitchen, once the pride of Garrett's backyard, was jackhammered into chunks and loaded onto pallets. By the end of the first day, the mansion looked like a carcass. By day 3, it looked like a skeleton. By day 6, it was gone. I thought watching it fall would feel like victory. But it didn't. It felt like watching a great, slow confession, a physical admission of guilt, stone by stone. I never spoke to Garrett during the demolition. Not once. He was seen a few times. Sometimes pacing on the far side of the property, sometimes talking on the phone, sometimes just sitting in his SUV watching the life he built be dismantled. One afternoon I caught a glimpse of his wife, Vanessa. She stood by the remains of the patio, holding one of their twin boys' soccer balls. She turned and looked at me. I didn't wave. She didn't either. We were past pleasantries now. The DQ didn't stop at removing the house. They began restoring the wetland buffer zone immediately. Native grasses were planted. Creek banks were reinforced. Contracted biologists took water samples and installed wildlife cameras. One of the inspectors told me salmon had already started returning upstream after years of avoidance. It's healing faster than we expected, she said. I nodded, staring at the water. It looked clearer. Alive. Nature always wants to come back, I murmured. She just needs us to get out of the way. Neighbors started stopping by. Quietly. Cautiously. Carol, who once posted about me being a bitter man, showed up with a pie and downcast eyes. Wait. I owe you an apology, she said. Dorothy came by with tears in her eyes. I didn't know it was that serious. We were wrong. Even the HOA president, who had never returned my emails, called to thank me for preserving the legacy of the neighborhood. I didn't say much. Because it wasn't about vindication. It was about responsibility. Jessica visited me the week the house was fully cleared. We stood together at the edge of the creek, where fresh seedlings now lined the bank. You were right, Dad, she said quietly. About everything. She slipped her arm through mine. This whole place, it feels different now. Like the land can breathe again. I looked at her, then at the water, then at the empty space where Garrett's mansion had once loomed. For the first time in years, the view was wide open. Clear sky above. Clean earth below. And the truth in between. But just when I thought it was over, the story flipped. Art. Because Garrett wasn't done. He still had one move left. And it would turn everything upside down. Just as the soil began to settle and the air started to feel lighter, I got a call that shattered everything I thought I knew. It was Tony from DQ. Wayne, he said, voice grave. We found something. What kind of something? He paused. A second structure. Hidden in the original site maps. Never permitted. And it's underground. My heart skipped. What are you talking about? Tony sighed. There's a concrete substructure buried beneath what used to be Garrett's pool house. The demolition team unearthed it while pulling up foundation slabs. It's sealed. Reinforced. I gripped the phone. Like a basement? Not exactly. More like a bunker. DQ wasn't authorized to investigate what was inside. It wasn't an environmental issue, at least not yet. But they reported it to the county sheriff and zoning department. By the next morning, Garrett's property was surrounded by county officials, deputies, and two plainclothed agents with clipboards and unmarked badges. I watched from my deck, stunned, as they brought in a backhoe with a surgical drill. They cracked open the concrete. What they found made national headlines. It was a data vault. Concrete walls, steel security door, and racks of climate-controlled hardware. A hidden server room, buried 10 feet underground. And inside, evidence of financial fraud. Documents. Encrypted backups. Hard drives labeled with names of shell companies. Some of the data had Garrett's name on it. Other names were redacted from the public report, but I didn't need to guess. He wasn't just arrogant. He wasn't just a violator of environmental law. He was laundering money. The tech company that made him rich? It was part of it. At least two of his biggest investors were offshore entities with no listed board, no address. He'd hidden the server off-record, underground, on land he thought no one would ever question. That's why he built so close to the creek. That's why he pushed the fence. He was hiding something far bigger than 6 feet of land. He was hiding a crime. 2 weeks later, Garrett was arrested. The charges were sealed at first, probably due to ongoing federal investigations. But word got out. Wire fraud. Tax evasion. Environmental permit fraud. A misuse of public grant funds meant for creek restoration. The man who stood on my porch and said, "Everything's about money," was now in federal custody. His mugshot was plastered across every local station, every tech blog. From millionaire to manacled, Oregon tech exec's hidden crimes unearthed with his mansion. And here's the kicker. If I hadn't reported the fence, no one would have found the bunker. No one would have questioned the location. No one would have pierced through the perfect facade he built over years of deception. That 6-foot fence? It wasn't just a theft of land. It was a trapdoor to his undoing. The neighborhood changed overnight. What was once whispered as Wayne the troublemaker had become Wayne the man who saved the creek and exposed a criminal. People who once crossed the street to avoid me now knocked on my door for advice on permits, zoning, and inspections. One guy even brought me homemade cider and asked if I'd help him just double-check his deck remodel. Funny how fast the world turns when the truth hits daylight. Jessica visited again. This time with her husband and my grandson. She stood with me in front of the re-wilded land. "Is this where the house was?" she asked. I nodded. "Feels like it was never there," she whispered. And she was right. Nature had reclaimed what arrogance built over. And I had reclaimed what no one else dared to defend. My land, my name, and the truth. But the twist, the cruel cosmic twist, was this. Garrett had made me doubt myself. Had made the world doubt me. Had nearly turned a community against one man who simply refused to be erased. And now, he was the one who vanished. From his mansion. From the neighborhood. From the pedestal he built on broken laws and stolen ground. It's been a year now. 12 full months since the last stone of Garrett's mansion was hauled away, since the wetlands began breathing again, since his carefully curated empire collapsed under the weight of his lies. And every morning I walked to the edge of my property, the spot where the fence once stood, and I watched the sunlight dance across the creek like nothing ever touched it. But I remember. The land remembers. Because some scars don't disappear. They just turn into boundaries. The state finished its restoration 2 months ago. Native oaks, sedges, and salmonberry bushes now line the creek bank where once there were infinity pools and imported stone. The soil test came back clean. The water clear. Last week I spotted a pair of herons nesting nearby. Haven't seen them in years. Even the trout are back. Nature doesn't hold grudges. But she remembers everything. And in her own quiet way she forgave me, for waiting too long, for nearly letting it slide, for nearly walking away from the truth. Garrett? He's serving a 6-year sentence in federal prison. Turns out the bunker he buried beneath the pool house wasn't just a storage space. It was the digital heart of a shell game that defrauded investors, falsified tech contracts, and laundered money through international accounts. Federal prosecutors called it one of the most elaborate financial smokescreens in Oregon's tech history. But all I remember is that smirk on his face when he said, "What are you gonna do about it?" He thought he was untouchable. He thought money could rewrite borders, silence neighbors by truth. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't comprehend, was that truth doesn't take bribes. It just waits for the right moment. I'm not a hero. I'm not a crusader. I'm just a man who refused to let 6 feet go. Because that 6 feet? It was the start of something rotten. And I've seen what happens when rot spreads. You lose everything, your land, your peace, your soul. Jessica visits more often now. She brings her son, and they walk with me through the tall grass where Garrett's house once stood. It's just meadow now. Wild, beautiful, humming with insects and life. "This is the story I'll tell him," she said once, watching her boy skip rocks in the creek. That his granddad stood up when everyone else said to sit down. That he knew the rules weren't meant to be bent just because someone had money. I said nothing. Because that kind of legacy, it speaks for itself. I keep one of Garrett's fence posts. Just one. It leans against the side of my shed, bent, rusting, harmless now. A reminder. That some people will always test you. That some neighbors will smile while trespassing. That some men build empires with no foundation and dare you to stop them. And sometimes you don't yell. You don't fight. You don't burn. You document. You wait. You watch. And when the time comes you make one phone call. And everything changes. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.